Today, I'm going to talk about 3 key behaviors to make weight loss automatic. And stick around to the end. I'm going to talk about Arlene's story and the fasting schedule that she used to lose her weight. The first key behavior I'm going to talk about is habits. Here I want to compare the eating strategies of the 1970s to those that happened in the 2000s. I chose the 1970s because this is a time before the obesity epidemic. Everybody thinks that gaining weight, losing weight, it's all about willpower. So do we really think that people just had more willpower in the 70s and somehow this was an epidemic of low willpower? That everybody in North America and now the world just has less willpower than they did? I find that really hard to believe. And I think it's not about willpower at all. I think it's about habits. When you look at a map of the United States and how much obesity there is, there's data from the CDC showing that in 1990, obesity is relatively uncommon. The states with the most obesity have about 10 to 14%. Now let's fast forward. This is an obesity map produced by the CDC in 2019. There's no states that are in the blue, which was the 10 to 14, which had the most obesity in 1990. Here, the state with the least amount of obesity is still at 20%. And there's many states which are deep in the red, pushing 30%. How did this happen? There were several major changes in the way we eat. When we look at large American surveys of how people ate, we can see from this graph that in 1977, most Americans were eating 3 times a day. That is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No snacks in between, no snacks at bedtime, and that's it. You ate when you ate, and when you didn't eat, there's no reason for you to be snacking or getting a cookie or getting a muffin or anything like that. When you do the same survey in the mid-2000s, what you can see is that people are eating almost 6 times a day, double the amount that they were just 25, 30 years ago. So that is, instead of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack. When people are eating all the time, that means they're not fasting. The mean number of minutes in between the meals has steadily started to shrink. This is a change not in willpower, but in our habits, and I think this has played a key role in the obesity epidemic. If we want to try and break this habit of eating all the time, we have to understand how habits form and how you can change them. Habits are generally broken down into 4 phases. The first step is the cue. This is what triggers off the whole habit. It's what reminds you that, hey, you want to eat. So, for example, if you are used to eating at a movie theater, then that is the cue. You see a movie, and then that is your cue that you want to go eat some popcorn, for example. And this is the craving. After the craving, you decide that you want to get some popcorn. This is the response. You go out to the concession stand, you buy yourself some popcorn, and you eat it, and you feel good, and that's your reward. And that's the 4 steps where habits are formed. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle. So you get the cue, get the craving, which leads to the response, the reward, which reinforces the cue. If you want to break these habits, most people focus on going between steps 2 and 3, between the craving and the response. And this is where people think it's all about willpower. That is, oh, you go to the movies and you want popcorn, but you impose hard will and you say no. Or you want ice cream, or you want cookies and you say no. Or you want candy and you say no. And that's where your iron willpower is. Well, that's really exhausting and generally not very successful. But there's a better way. What you have to do is start at the beginning with the cue. It's much easier to get rid of the cue rather than let the cycle get started and then try to break it. So instead of trying to get rid of the craving, can you remove the cue? What is the prompts to eat? Well, we have a lot these days. So, for example, people sit in front of the TV and they decide that they want something to munch on, or they get into a car, they take a road trip and they decide they want something to eat. Or the cue could be you're in the office, you have a meeting, and somebody is always ordering a plate of cookies for your afternoon meeting, or muffins. Candy bowl in the middle of the workday might be your cue to eat that. Rather than relying on willpower, why don't you simply make a rule? No food at meetings. No eating at your desk. No candy bowls, because people are trying to lose weight and it's unfair for those people. Removing the cue is a lot easier than trying to let the cycle run. If you do wind up with the cue, the other place to intervene is with the craving. Instead of trying to quit cold turkey, can you replace this craving for, say, popcorn at the movies with something different and less harmful? If you sit down in front of the TV at nighttime and that's your relaxation period, instead of snacking, maybe make your habit getting some nice green tea or a coffee, decaffeinated perhaps. Something else that you can replace so that when you get this cue, you no longer get the craving for the popcorn or the chips or those other unhealthy things. If you want to encourage a good habit, such as fasting now, what can you do? And that leads me to step number 2, put it on the schedule. What you'd like to do is schedule something instead of eating so that it makes it easy. That's your cue. So what I do, for example, is instead of having lunch, I schedule a meeting. Zoom meeting these days, but something where I'm not going to have time to eat, and by the time I'm finished, I'm going to be doing something else and I'm going to be busy. I'm not even going to think about it. So your cue might be every Mondays and Thursdays, you have a meeting with your team, or you go for a walk, something else. That's your cue. You're going to trigger the craving, the idea that you need to fast, and pretty soon you're going to notice that you're not even that hungry because you've put it on the schedule. And that's how you're going to make your weight loss automatic. The response is the fasting. And how are you going to make it easier for yourself? Well, there's one proven way to make it easier for yourself, and that's to do it with other people. Peer pressure is what we call it when children generally have pressure to do something, and we think of it in a bad way. But it can also work in a good way, and this is called peer support. So if everybody around you is fasting, hey, you're going to want to fast, and you're going to find it a lot easier too. Doing it in a big group is how people used to do it. If nobody that you know of is eating, well, that's going to be a lot easier for you to not eat. It's going to be hard if your friends, your family are eating, they're cooking, you see it, you smell it, it's going to be very difficult. So put it on the schedule and find other people to do it. And finally, what's the reward? Well, obviously food is not going to be a good reward. You don't want to break your fast with a dozen donuts. That's going to eliminate all the benefits that you got. But there are lots of ways. Maybe you want to do a manicure or a pedicure. You're going to buy yourself some flowers, for example. Go for a massage. Have a nice soak in a bath. Something else. Buy yourself a book. just enjoy reading it. There's lots of different ways to reward yourself, and you put it on the schedule. You know, hey, Mondays, I'm going to do the fast. I'm going to finish early, go home because you had more time to do your work, and I'm going to go for a massage. Something like that. And while you're enjoying yourself, you're reinforcing this cycle, and you're going to make it easier and easier for yourself. The weight loss will become automatic. When you're trying to break those bad habits of eating junk foods, there's something else you can do. And that brings us to tip number 3 after making a habit, putting it on the schedule. That's spoil your appetite. What do I mean by this? When you're hungry, you're going to be tempted by a lot more foods. So when you have things like chips and ice cream and cookies all around you, well, it's going to be very hard to resist them if you're hungry. So not during fasting, but on your regular days, make sure you eat enough. If you fill up with meat and vegetables, you're going to be less likely to want to eat chips after dinner because you're going to be full. It's just like your mother said. If you wanted a bedtime snack in the 1970s, she would have told you, no, you should have ate more at dinner time. And that's the key. If you are full, well, those things are suddenly not that appealing. Think of a time that you really ate a lot at a buffet or something like that. And that's, I think, part of the secret of how people in the 1970s effortlessly kept that weight off. They weren't trying to lose weight. They weren't barely even watching what they were eating. The diet industry was nowhere to be found. Gyms were not a big thing. Yet, they were able to keep that weight off by making the weight loss automatic. They made it a habit of fasting. They put it on the schedule. And they spoiled their appetite with good natural food. So Arlene was able to lose a lot of her weight. And she did this by understanding really the body's natural insulin response and how that is the key to controlling your weight. It wasn't about calories. It was a hormonal imbalance, not a caloric imbalance. And by understanding that, she made it a habit to fast 16 to 20 hours in a day. When she did eat, she avoided all those foods that were going to stimulate an insulin response, predominantly the refined carbohydrates, the grains, the sugars, the sweeteners, the starchy vegetables. And by eating those foods, she was avoid snacking by spoiling her appetite. From the beginning, it took her about 11 months to lose all that weight, and she lost an average of 1.3 pounds every week. A year later, she's still able to maintain that weight loss because she's able to make it a habit. I think you've done a great job, Arlene. Congratulations on your success, and thanks for sharing it with us here. So that's it for this week. I hope you learned something in this video. If you did, maybe share it with your friends. Maybe they'll learn something too. If you enjoyed this video, well, you could do me a favor. Hit that like button, the one down there. I'll see you next week.